Hi. I'm so excited to find out what happens next in chapter 10. We sort of left a kind of a cliffhanger when we were reading last. And today I want to show you something that the author does in the first part of chapter 10, which is called a flashback. And it's something that you can put in your own writing too, a flashback. So I'm going to read it, I'm going to identify the part where the flashback is, and then I'm going to give you something to do in your reading and writing when it's time for you to do your 30 minutes of independent reading. So let's get started with this flashback that happens at the end of the section that I'm going to read to you.
That night, Klaus was the Baudelaire orphan sleeping fitfully in the bed, and Violet was the Baudelaire orphan staying up, working by the light of the moon. All day the two siblings had wandered around the house, doing the assigned chores and scarcely speaking to each other. Klaus was too tired and despondent to speak, and Violet was holed up in the inventing area of her mind, too busy planning to talk. When night approached, Violet gathered up the curtains that had been Sunny's bed and brought them to the door to the tower stairs, where the enormous assistant of Count Olaf's, the one who looked neither like a man nor a woman, was standing guard. Violet asked whether she could bring the blankets to her sister to make her more comfortable during the night. The enormous creature merely looked at Violet with its blank white eyes and shook its head, then dismissed her with a silent gesture. Violet knew, of course, that Sunny was too terrified to be comforted by a handful of draperies, but she hoped that she would be allowed a few moments to hold her and tell her that everything would turn out all right. Also, she wanted to do something known in the crime industry as casing the joint. Casing the joint means observing a particular location in order to formulate a plan. For instance, if you are a bank robber, although I hope you aren't, you might go to the bank a few days before you plan to rob it. Perhaps wearing a disguise, you would look around the bank and observe security guards, cameras, and other obstacles so that you could plan how to avoid capture or death during your burglary. Violet, a law-abiding citizen, was not planning to rob a bank, but she was planning to rescue Sunny, and was hoping to catch a glimpse of the tower room in which her sister was being held prisoner, so as to make her plan more easily. But it appeared that she wasn't going to be able to case the joint after all. This made Violet nervous as she sat on the floor by the window, working on her invention as quietly as she could. Violet had very few materials with which to invent something, and she didn't want to wander around the house looking for more, for fear of arousing the suspicions of Count Olaf and his troop. But she had enough to build a rescuing device. Above the window was a sturdy metal rod from which the curtains had hung, and Violet took it down. Using one of the rocks Count Olaf had left in a pile in the corner, she broke the curtain rod into two pieces. She then bent each piece of the rod into several sharp angles, leaving tiny cuts on her hand as she did so. Then Violet took down the painting of the eye. On the back of the painting, as on the back of many paintings, was a small piece of wire to hang on the hook. She removed the wire and used it to connect the two pieces together. Violet now had made what looked like a large metal spider. She then went over to the cardboard box and took out the ugliest of the clothes that Mrs. Poe had purchased, the outfits the Baudelaire orphans would never wear no matter how desperate they were. Working quickly and quietly, she began to tear these into long, narrow strips and to tie these strips together. Among Violet's many useful skills was a vast knowledge of different types of knots. The particular knot she was using was called the Devil's Tongue. A group of female Finnish pirates invented it back in the 15th century and named it the Devil's Tongue because it twisted it this way and that in a most complicated and eerie way. The Devil's Tongue was a very useful knot, and when Violet tied the cloth strips together end to end, it formed a sort of rope. As she worked, she remembered something her parents had said to her when Klaus was born, and again when they brought Sunny home from the hospital. "You are the eldest Baudelaire child," they had said kindly but firmly, "and as the eldest it will always be your responsibility to look after your younger siblings. Promise us that you will always watch out for them and make sure they don't get into trouble." Violet remembered her promise and thought of Klaus, whose bruised face still looked sore, and Sunny dangling from the top of the tower like a flag, and began working faster. Even though Count Olaf was, of course, the cause of all this misery, Violet felt as if she had broken her promise to her parents and vowed to make it right.
So, did anyone notice what the flashback was? In this case, it was Violet. She was working on some sort of invention, and while she was working on it, she was reminded about something that her parents had said to her when they were alive. So, what do I want you to do with this? Well, obviously, I want you to do 30 minutes of independent reading. And I know your book in your section might not have a flashback, but what I want you to do after your 30 minutes of independent reading is to write your own. So, after reading for 30 minutes, I want you to choose one character who is going to be reminded of something in that section that you're reading. So, let's say there's somebody in your book that's walking to the park and sees a dandelion. I want you to invent a flashback that character might have. So after the character sees the dandelion, in the section that you read, I want you to add a little bit of your own story, typed on the computer of course, about what that dandelion might have reminded that character about from their childhood. So the assignment is to invent a flashback for a character in the section of the book that you are reading. I'm really looking forward to seeing what kind of flashbacks they have. I don't know all the books that you're reading, but I think I'm going to learn a lot more about your characters when you show me what something reminds them about their childhood. Hope to see you next time. Enjoy.